Hi, my name's Clyde Anderson. I'm from the Building Designers Association of Australia and ABSA. We're now joined. And question to Anthony. In the Australian Housing Data Portal, we use data for accredited assessors and non-accredited assessors. And non-accredited assessors are subject to quality assurance. So how do we know we can add those numbers and make them the same?
Good question. I don't. I have to treat them as equivalent because they look equivalent in our system. So there's a broader question here around the move from pre-NCC 2022 to post-NCC 2022. And my experience with Western Australia 5 years ago might be kind of illuminating in this space, which was that when Western Australia looked at adopting the 6-star changes, they were operating at a very low level of NatHERS use. 20%, I think, was the case there, as opposed to 50% in Queensland now. And I went over there and spoke to a whole lot of assessors who are having a whole lot of builders who are having a lot of trouble building to the 6-star standard. And when I really asked them a lot of questions about it, it turned out a lot of them were using unaccredited assessors and assessors who were using practices that were using the NatHERS software perhaps, but not using any of the NatHERS rules or protocols, and were producing their own certificates. And the builders were being told they were getting a 6-star rating or whatever it was, but they weren't. They were getting something that was 2, 3, 4 stars perhaps. Then 6-star came in, rules changed, the assessors started using NatHERS more than they were before, and suddenly these assessors were having to make a jump from something like 3 stars up to 6 stars, which was a really big move all in one go. And so one of the things I'd encourage you to do is ask your assessor, are they a NatHERS accredited assessor? And make sure that what you're getting is a NatHERS accredited certificate, because then you are covered by all of the quality assurance procedures and protocols. And I think kind of that's where you're getting to with your point. I can't guarantee that what's coming through is equivalent. We have done statistical looks at the data that comes through from accredited and unaccredited assessors, and we can't find any statistical difference. So it's not like accredited assessors are delivering lower star ratings or higher star ratings or anything like that in comparison to unaccredited at a statistical level, but we have no way of interrogating the quality of the input data that goes into those ratings.
Yeah, and a follow-up question. It's relating to using the Queensland data since 1st of May. Because we're in transition and most of those houses probably weren't aiming to get to the new standard because their design was dated prior to the 1st of May. If it's dated prior to the 1st of May, the drawing set has got a date that is earlier. We can use the earlier code, so they may not be reflecting the current new requirements in those data.
Yeah, look, that is true. We can only work with the data we've got. The ratings are higher, so we are comparing 7 stars post-NCC 2022 to 6 stars pre-NCC 2022. You're right, there's a whole range of different reasons that might not be a perfect comparison. Give me another year or two and I'll be able to give you much better data, but I've got what I've got at this point in time.
Okay, another question? We've got one online, correct?
We do, and the question is from Chris Coughlin, and it is, why is there not more focus on solar batteries?
Who'd like to take that?
I can grab it from the pot. So I think the first thing to think about there is that's dealing with the energy generation and consumption side. And my accountability through building ministers and working in partnership with climate and energy ministers would remind us that the cheapest unit of energy, regardless, is the one that we don't have to use. And so making sure that the thermal performance helps reduce the need for appliances to balance out heating and cooling, which then reduces the amount that we draw from the solar or the battery, means that solar and battery contribution can go to other energy uses in the building. So it is still important that we try to deal with both, not just focus solely on solar and batteries.
And if you use an NatHERS tool, you can say you've got a battery, you can put in the number of kilowatt hours that it stores. So it's in there. They're not part of a minimum regulation, but you do get credit for it if you've got it.
Okay, next question up the front here, please.
Thank you. My name's Dave Pemberton from QB's Energy Assessments. I actually have 4 questions. I need to ask the chair. Do I ask all 4 or do I ask one at a time? And I don't
We
wanna- I
might
don't
give
wanna
you
hog the
we might give
microphone.
you a couple and then pass it off and then come
Okay,
back.
Very good. So the first 2, I guess my first comment is, first off, this is a really good forum, and thank you to the government and everyone attending, because it's good to see 3 out of the 4 key stakeholders, ABCB, state and NATA's here. The 4th one that's missing is probably representatives from the software supplier, but I guess we've got Tony from... we've got Nick. Very good. Thanks, Nick. I guess my first comment is the implementation of this NCC 2022 for Queensland has been terrible. And I'm sure that other states have probably had frustration, but there's been many issues that's been raised in relation to the implementation, the rollout and the integration of this stuff. And my friend Lindsay Walker is fully aware of my conversation in relation to that. I guess at a very high level, I'm asking, can the next time we do the changes, either for NCC 2025 or 2028, through ABCB and the state government and NATA's and the software, can we allow more lead time before the implementation and the cut-off? Because I understand all 4 authorities have critical timeframes and deliverables from a political or whatever, but at the end of the day, this rollout of NCC 2022 is a major impact. To back that up, the information that I've heard so far today isn't lining up with what's happening at the coalface. A colleague of mine is saying that they have over 2,000 assessments currently sitting in front of them that will be done under the old deemed to satisfy elemental with the old glazing calculator, which none of that data would be visible to anyone here today, and potentially another 1,000 coming on. And some of their associates for Queensland have probably in the order of another 4,000 to 6,000 assessment that aren't visible. So we're not seeing the real result of the impact of this NCC 2022. So that's my first comment. The second one, and I'll limit it to...
Is there actually a question? Because
Yeah, so
we take on board what you're saying, but that's not a question.
Okay, so the question is how are we going to ensure as we move forward from what we've done with this implementation to make sure that we don't have those sorts of repeat issues on implementation because there's so much information. So that's the first question from the panel, is what can we do to learn from that? The other question is about in relation to the software, which probably relates to NATA's and to Tony from CSIRO, is that the evidence that we are seeing is that the old software version to the new software version is creating quite significant variances when you change parameters. If you, like, we use First Rate 5, and when we use the old one prior to the 1st of May versus the other one, some scenarios improve, like 0.1 of a 0.2 of a star, and if we tweak the thing, it actually goes backwards. My understanding again, and that's with the same house, moving it, whether we change it from a parameter of a house that's up on stumps elevated versus ones that slab on ground. And then at other times, it actually goes the other way around. So there seems to be some anomalies in the software, which doesn't instill a lot of confidence with us as energy assessors or trying to explain that to the client.
Okay, can someone explain about the software?
Yep. In terms of the software, what we saw in very broad terms was when things were re-star banded, that passive solar, well ventilated house, single story house on a slab was generally improving. Timber floor and 2-story was generally not getting worse. They're only about 0.1, 0.2 stars either way at 6 stars. But it depends on the balance of heating and cooling in that particular house. So, and like Melbourne, where I do most of my rating work, the proportion of the total load that is heating can be anywhere from 30% to 90%. So it depends on the design, the orientation and so forth. So that you're getting slightly different results for, what seemed to be the same house. I'm afraid the only answer is dig a bit deeper, and it's probably okay. I don't think there's major issues with the software. It's just that the new climate data is giving you things that seem unintuitive right now, but the more you get into it, the more it'll make sense. Because, yeah, we started at that same point in 2019 with NCC 2022. As I said, we rated everything 3 times. So it takes a lot of digging into it. In terms of implementation issues and that sort of stuff, there have been ideas around that maybe it would have been a good idea to have workshops to get a builder or a designer to come along with their energy assessor with a project they're having trouble with, and to get some experts in the room with them, get a half a dozen sets of designers and assessors, and work through it with them, and then turn those into case studies. So it's really easy being smart in hindsight, but those sort of things I think are part of a better strategy. And it's hard for the building industry. It's NCC 2022 or 2024, but I know builders have got to make a buck. They've got to keep their subbies in work. It is really hard to look at what does this all mean. And so, and if there was ever one that needed a bit of earlier thought, it's this change. So I think where we are now is in part a business as usual response from the industry as well as from the others, other stakeholders. And this was not your business as usual sort of change. What's important is what do we do now?
Okay, we have some more questions, and I know that you've got more questions that you want to ask, but there are many hands up in the room. So firstly, if you can just pass to the lady next to you.
I didn't get the second one answered, sorry.
I think we might have captured. Have we captured that, or have we got further answer on the software?
Come back to that shortly.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
Just be interested to hear how to pass demountable dwellings in Queensland, finding great difficulties passing demountable homes. Any tips, thoughts?
I mean, we didn't look at that in the RIS. So in the work that I did. Now, ABCB might have done some more work on that. So, but I've not assessed any.
The practical application using NatHearst software is terrible. They're just not passing thermally, and I'm hearing claims that they are passing. So I'd just be interested to hear where these are coming from.
Could I just check, do you know whether any redesign or change has occurred in the construction? So if I jump to the pilot projects through the modern methods of construction, what we were hearing was that those modular homes were meeting livable and 7-star, and were getting sort of positive user reactions. People were coming in and saying, oh, wow, that the slightly wider corridor here makes this feel more like a traditional home. So I would just ask, do you know whether they've done redesign of those demountables or transportables?
No, they're not redesigned. They're just standard demountable homes.
And so, yeah, but
the modern methods of construction, I'd like that information to be provided more broadly, how these have been constructed, because the website doesn't seem to have that information. So it'd be great to have that.
Be great to throw that one on the parking lot, please.
Lindsay, if we can pop that one on there. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next question. There's another one online.
And this one is related to apartment buildings, and Melissa Chandler has asked if the panel could advise of any observations of climate data and any changes observed of construction methodology or use of elements such as ceiling fans, appliances, etc.
I wouldn't expect to see a lot of information on Class 2 yet. It's just too early in the process. Class 2 buildings have a much longer lead time to design and push through the permitting process and then to get to construction. So I wouldn't really trust a lot of the data that we've got is according to the new standards at this point in time. Sorry.
Okay.
If I could add just one more thing, have a look at that cost benefit evaluation of the building fabric. yes, we've got all the houses in there, but we've got also all the changes that were made to the apartments, the 24-unit apartment building. It's aggregated, you know, not by apartment, but by the whole building. So you'll see a number of the changes there. But I mean, we didn't change construction designs. We absolutely use ceiling fans, and there are issues depending on the ceiling height as to how practical it is to put in those ceiling fans. But my first port of call would be that report and just see what we did to go from average 6 to average 7.
Okay, we've got another question over here.
Yeah. Russell from the Queensland chapter of the Institute of Architects. I'm not going to write my clients a letter saying sorry for designing 0-star houses over quite a lengthy career. I was intrigued to hear the variation in the ventilation from Tony and North Queensland down to other houses. My question is related to the ventilation in the NCC. The NCC says you can have 5% ventilation for every climate zone in Australia. I view this as totally idiotic. It then goes on to say that the area of the ventilation is calculated as the window sash. I chased up the ABCB years ago and asking what did that mean, and was told you can open it 1 millimetre and comply. So why should anybody have any faith in the NCC if such idiot things are allowed to be incorporated in it? And also, the Queensland government, since it can override the NCC, why doesn't it do so as far as ventilation? I'm saying there should be much more ventilation in North Queensland, above 5%, to in the bottom of Tasmania. When are you going to implement some sensible policies?
Okay, well, potentially the ventilation part of that question would fall within the parameters.
Yeah, that's right. Most of what you're talking about there does relate to the part of the code that deals with indoor air quality. That's where the requirements for ventilation come into play. Look, it is a vexed one. It has a simple minimum necessary regulatory approach. That doesn't mean you should only do that. And there is a complexity that flows with relying on openable windows. That only works if people open their windows. So if I just draw a contrast to seatbelts in cars, we require cars to have seatbelts. We also require you to wear your seatbelt, and we check you're wearing your seatbelt, and we fine you if you're not. With openable windows, we don't go around and check that people are actually opening their windows, nor do we propose to fine people for not opening their windows. So there is an element of us setting a minimum necessary regulation that enables good practice, but we can't force it there. And that one is around air quality more than ventilation. I accept you'd like to see more. I encourage you to design better into your property or into your clients' properties, but this is a minimum necessary regulation.
In the glazing calculator, you put in the openable area of the windows. If every window in that building is only 5%, you are going to have a really tough time getting that glazing calculator to work. If, on the other hand, you've got a house that's got louver windows all the way around, which are fully openable, it's going to be a lot easier to pass that glazing calculator. So as a minimum standard, what Gary says about, yeah, it's 5%, that's what it is. It's a vexed question. But in practice, I think greater ventilation is encouraged because you get a better result if you've got more openable windows.
Right, thank you. Our next question will go here and then up the back.
John Moynihan, Equilateral. Question I have is about your point about the louvers. When we're looking at getting a house as efficient as we can, particularly in its heating and cooling loads, louvers leak, open or closed. So the propensity to put more louvers in effectively counteracts what you're trying to achieve. So is there thoughts about getting some sort of balance into the percentage of louvers within a house?
When you do NatHERS ratings, you will presume that when those louvers shut, they shut tightly. And my understanding is the breezeway carrier for louver windows do shut tightly. That's not the only carrier out there. So there is also the ability to say, well, I've got a larger gap size because of those louvers, and you can evaluate that in NatHERS software. You can say it's small, medium, large, and not weather stripped. You've got to go out of rating mode to do it.
Yeah.
But you can certainly look at that and evaluate that and let your clients know, well, these ones that do shut tightly, they'll give you this performance. These ones that don't shut tightly, they'll give you this performance. So it's not a regulatory solution to that, but you can certainly see the impact.
So I guess when air pressure testing houses becomes regulatory, it'll show.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, that will certainly
sure.
expose those, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and then there's a lady up the back.
Thank you. Diane Johnson from Master Builders. I'd also like to echo thank you very much for this session and agree that it's a great lesson learned for future NCCs, having practical how to apply regulations is a really good lesson learned for future. But my question's for Craig. Hi, Craig. All the talk today has been about individual houses and how we're actually going to deliver this in individual houses and make changes in individual houses. But I expect the department in your portfolio of public housing is facing similar problems or similar challenges that our volume builders are dealing with in how you deal with this across a whole program or a whole, you can't individually design each dwelling. Have you got some solutions or some ideas on how we might be able to work to feed back to the volume builders and how we can do this across a range of houses that aren't individually designed for each site?
No immediate answers there, perhaps, but perhaps our experience, they will help. Sure, we saw the 7-star thing coming in the apartment space, and that's what most of social housing these days is, apartments. So that's where all my energy is spent. And like many design practices, so I manage client-side designers. We scope the projects, we work the projects through to about a DA level, and then they move over into a tender space and they get built. And all those bits of paperwork that include the NatHERS certificate, because that's how we regarded the NatHERS certificate, was a piece of paperwork, get done later. We didn't even get to look at it. That's how important we felt it was. And in the apartment space, we're coming from a low base, so we felt the hard work was done by us up front, putting a roof on it, putting an eaves on the roof, looking at the orientation, shading the windows. They're all the things that we did to improve the thermal performance of the apartments, and then the certificate would get printed later. So seeing the 7-star thing coming on board, we decided to have a look at how this would impact us, and we pulled out 400 dwellings that we'd already done, and we noted that 80% of them already hit the 7-star mark. So even with that lazy approach that we took, we were already right on that 7-star mark. And then we looked at the projects overall to see how they were complying, and it was 1, 2, or 3 apartments with any apartment project that was under rate, not meeting that minimum, and really dragging the average down. So we had a look at those. The interesting thing for us, we were all design experts, and we knew orientation, we knew breezes, we knew all these things, but in seeing 4 stars written on an apartment on a plan right in front of you made you analyse it again and use all the things that we knew as designers and go, oh my God, yes, this is in Brisbane a cold apartment to live in. There will be a heating load. We didn't even think of heating load. It's all about cooling loads here in Brisbane. No, but this will be an uncomfortable apartment. So we felt great shame at that, the fact that we were building these social housing things that were not coming up to pass. So we implemented a process where early in the design stage, we would get certifier advice. Like all the advice was leading up to the implementation of the 7 stars, get advice early and redesign your practices. Have another look at what you're doing. The interesting thing for us is we've written 55 design briefs asking for early energy assessor advice. We've received it on 7 projects. it just confuses the industry. What do you mean early advice? You're not yet complete enough in your design for us to pump out the certificate. Because, and this is going to be the impact on Queensland, we're just not geared up just yet to provide that early advice that we need to get redesign our standard house designs, our standard unit designs, and get them right. And I think, Diane, that's all I can say is we do need to go back to the drawing board a little bit, look at what we've been doing for so long in the apartment space, because it is the low base. It's imperative on us to do it. In the houses, maybe less so. But yeah, there will be some changes required to our standard practices.
My experience is mainly Victoria. That's where I'm based. And this is anecdata as well, but it speaks to kind of the point you made and the point Tony made earlier about having to reconsider things. And the big project home builders that were planning well in advance of all of this have been doing a lot of work trying to get their standard portfolio of homes up to the new standard. What I'm hearing is that the biggest change they're having to make is in their sales pipeline. Which houses can go on which blocks, and starting to think about just excluding certain houses from certain areas and certain climate zones and certain orientations. And that is a sales funnel issue for them. So, their customers typically come to them via the website. They know how big their block is. They know they want a 4-bedroom house, and they go, all right, 4-bedroom houses on a block of 15-metre width or whatever it is, and they get presented with a whole range of options. They may need a few extra parameters on that sales funnel now that excludes a couple of designs. We're used to excluding designs that don't fit on the block because they're too wide or they're too long or something like that. We're not used to excluding ones that, the garage is on the north side and there's not enough solar access to that house in Melbourne. And so they're trying to figure out how to make that sales funnel work and provide a good customer experience and deliver a product they know that they can make comply on that site. So I think that's a different set of changes to just changing your building fabric.
We have another online question, and then can I just get, I know we've got one over there, and I know you have more that we will come back to. Anna?
And I'm conscious that there's quite a few coming through online, so I don't anticipate in the 10 minutes we'll get through them all. So I'm going to ask a couple in the order they've come in, if that's okay. So the next one is from Natasha Prasek, and she has asked, how critical is implementing thermal breaks and improving air tightness to achieving 7 stars?
Obviously, if you've got metal frames, then you need to do extra now. And the idea is to get it up to the level of what a timber house would be. If you're looking at passive house, they go to extraordinary lengths to think about the junctions of 2 different walls and making sure that that junction is properly insulated as well. Now, that isn't part of the minimum standard, but it is extraordinarily good practice. So thermal breaks, I know there's been a lot of discussion about if you've got a metal frame and you've been putting in thermal bridging mitigation, does that provide a solution to that as well? And I think in some cases it does, and in some cases it may not. It depends on what the intent of the regulation is. But certainly thermal breaks, thermal bridging is a big part of it now, but only if you've got metal frames. Then the next step, the passive house type step, hasn't been done through minimum regulation.
Thank you. We have another question which I believe has been answered earlier in the discussions around when you mentioned the working groups and the workshops that you've discussed in regard to the hindsight of implementation. It's from Linda Rosengreen of Master Builders, and effectively she is asking if any builders other than those constructing green homes were included in the consultation period in regards to the practicality of implementing the changes, and mentions that they're seeing some costs being reported that are higher than we would expect.
Yes, there were a lot of organisations, including builders, large and small, that were directly involved in the consultation. I actually had to face a question like this from one of the prominent New South Wales media personalities, some might call them shock jocks, who were claiming that there'd been no consultation, and I offered to speak to that radio personality with their sponsors and to talk about the submission that we had actually received from the sponsors and the meeting that we'd had with them to help understand where there were differences in perspective. So not to be cheeky about it, when we were consulting, if people came to us and said, we think your costings are wrong, we would reach out and try to understand what are the differences in the assumptions. Are we talking about the same sort of house? If we were modelling a 200 square metre house and they were modelling a 400 square metre house, clearly we were going to get different answers. But if we reconciled those, we could then work out whether our approach was right. Maybe coming back to also touch on David's question about how would we do this differently next time. The first thing I'd say is when these provisions were developed, the questions that ministers asked us to take out were, should we make this change? And if so, how? And so a lot of the feedback that we got in consultation was, don't make the change. There wasn't so much emphasis on the how. If I were offering advice to ministers today on what might we do if we ever had to do this again, it would be give us a clear policy outcome that you're after early, and then let us go out and talk to industry about the best way to achieve that. And so this exercise today is a terrific example of trying to share information to implement these rules in a really effective way. If we did something like this earlier and said we've got to achieve 20% reduction in energy use, or we've got to get to 7-star, or we've got to get to net zero, whatever the answer might be, and asked for your feedback on the least disruptive ways to get there, I think that'd be really useful. But what I need to ask then is that in coming into that room, accept that the policy decision has been made and help us then think about how we would implement it with the most efficient path and the least pain and the best benefit, which is kind of what you're doing today for the decisions that have already been taken.
Okay, thank you. We'll go over here. I know we've got a question here. This gentleman here's got a question, and then we'll go back to you, David, and then if there's another one online.
Hi, I'm Michael from Building Approvals and Advice. Just a question about the modelling. Right at the beginning, we talked about 10 houses across different climate zones, which is great. How many extension alterations did we include in any of that data, or was it all brand new homes?
So the answer was all brand new.
Yep.
While we're here.
I've got two. The first one's really quick. With the two different wall types, the thermal mass and lightweight, is there any direction that we can rely on that, yes, we can see cavity brick and use concrete block?
I don't think it made it through to the final regulation, so it's not in NCC 2022, and probably my fault. So sorry, but that was the intention at the time. I should also add, had it not been for COVID, we'd still be waiting for these regulations because I had nothing else to do. So, but working 60, 70-hour weeks for months and months and months, that was just one that slipped off. I have spoken to some of Gary's staff about it. I think watch this space would be the. I'm going to give you a blank look. Yeah. Okay.
It just leaves us as assessors doing deemed to satisfy assessments. Just are we doing the right thing?
What you need is
we just need some
that this is kosher.
Yeah.
This is fair income. I can do this, and this is why I've done it.
Yep. Second question. I'm aware that there's some issues with the NCC 2022 glazing calculator.
Yep.
I know you are too. Again, I'm looking for clarity because the position I'm in, I need to know, is it okay to use? Can it be deemed okay if I know that it's not okay? Or,
Yep.
Where's the certainty for us there?
Next week.
Oh, fantastic, Tony. That's great.
I'm halfway through the questions. Some of the things that you're questioning, they were just not documented. It's in the calculator and it's right, but things like the floor covering of a utility room, which is not heated and cooled, you don't need to worry about what it is. It won't affect things at all, for example. So I'm working through that at the moment. Had I not slipped over in the bath 2 weeks ago and hurt my shoulder, which is a very old person thing to do, it would have been finished already. I'd hoped to actually have all the answers when I came up here, but I'm halfway through. Sarah from ABCB's got me on it, and you'll get answers soon.
Okay, now we'll come back over here.
Thank you. My third question, Annalise mentioned early on about the 4 key areas. That's information coming about raised on stumps, double-storey homes, removal homes, and renovations, additions and alterations. This matter's been raised with the state for about 12, 18 months when the draft NCC 2022 came out. Are you able to give us a definitive position on when that is going to be consulted? Last week, NATAS came out and did the forums on rolling out the implementation on assessing existing homes under our Magic Plan and things like that. So we're doing this, coming out and rolling out this end spectrum of assessing existing homes. Clearly understand we've got this big change on the new homes, but one of the big things is those 4 areas, particularly additions and alterations, is a gap, significant gap, and people have been screaming out for this, and unfortunately there's too many people saying go and consult your certifier or whatever. We just seem to be in no man's land, and I guess is there a definitive position from the state that what we're going to do in relation to those 4 key areas, and if so, when, please?
Okay, is that something we can answer now, or is it something that we need to? Thanks, Lindsay.
So that's a parking lot issue, and in terms of that, we're aware of the issue. David's right, we have been thinking about it, and we will get to it, but it's one that we don't have an answer for today. And it's also a significant policy outcome that we would potentially need to address to that. So absolutely aware of the issue. That's what we're doing here now. I'm taking notes on stuff, and that's one of the ones we'll be addressing as soon as we can.
Okay, and David, you have one more? Yes?
No, thank you. I'll leave it for the others. Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you. And I will take one more question from online, thanks.
Thank you. And this one is from Jeremy Turner of ABES. And he has advised, what are the views of the panel on the standard of construction conformity that is being achieved and the need or otherwise for mandatory inspections around energy efficiency compliance?
I know you'd probably like to answer this one, Gary, but can I take a quick first one? There was a project in Victoria done where they evaluated 2,000 houses and they checked all of the energy efficiency stuff. They used thermographic imaging cameras. They checked the little labels on all the windows. And in general terms, there's actually much better compliance than they thought. I think about 15% were a bit under, and actually 15% or so were a bit over. So it's been a worry of mine for decades that we're not getting the houses that we ought to be getting because people are cutting corners. But at least in that Victorian study, it seemed to not be as big an issue as we thought.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think the underlying thing here, are we getting what we think we're getting? That comes through, when you talk about does the modelling model ventilation, at the core of that is the performance of the dwelling actually what we think we're going to get? And yes, all of us wonder that. I mean, we're doing a little bit of research with UQ to have a look at, putting temperature sensors into buildings and seeing how well do they correlate with what we thought we were going to get. Some interesting things there if you throw in CO2 sensors in terms of people who may have concerns about, in multi-residential living, about neighbours, about noise, about road noise, and the behaviour they might have around opening and closing windows. So all of the things that we do, all the houses that we build, are going to be lived in by people, and they're going to use those, they're going to have particular ways that they use them, I suppose. And for us, we're serious when we say that when we saw that we were delivering things that weren't up to a standard, it was really important to us to fix that, because we know if we make that house more comfortable, people are going to be less likely to heat it or to cool it. It's going to save them money, and it's going to make their lives better as a result of it.
also add one other thing that we looked at air tightness just recently. There's a paper just put out about a week and a half ago looking at the air tightness of houses built in the last 3 years all up the East Coast, and the level to which the built outcome matches both the NatHERS assumptions for those houses and the NCC assumption of around 10 air changes per hour. It was extraordinary. I expected it to be far more diverse out there, and certainly when we did this 13 or 14 years ago, it was much more diverse, but houses built in the last 3 years look like they are being built almost exactly as we expect them to be built by and large. And yeah, I've seen the same study Tony's talking about in Victoria too. God, I wish they would publish it. If someone wants to talk to me about FOIing it, come and talk to me later. I'm not sure I'm allowed to do it. But the results would be awesome to see.